2 years ago, I had surgery in Vietnam. That was followed by a second surgery about a year and a half later, and then subsequently a third surgery that was unrelated to the first one or the second one because the first and second one were kind of connected. And so I had three operations in Ho Chi Minh City in a span of 2 years. That was kind of crazy. I spent a total of over a month in the hospital as well. So in any other circumstances in the US, it would have been really, really costly, but it's kind of different in Vietnam. And today, let's talk about the experience of that. So what happened first, right? I got to go back to the background on what happened when I got my first surgery. In 2003, I was riding a scooter from Ho Chi Minh City all the way up to the Chinese border, Haijiang, Sapa, those area. And I was taking a bit longer to do it. I think I was aiming at about 2.5 months to get there. And instead, I got to Da Nang about a month into it. And it was only a few days after my birthday that this whole incident started. I was finishing my ride on the Hai Van Pass in Da Nang. And I had started about 2 o'clock because I heard that it would be good to go north to Hue during that time and then turn around, come back. On my way back, it was sunset roughly about 5:30, almost 6 o'clock, and I saw a beautiful sunset. And on the way back, it was just so beautiful. It was so amazing. The entire ride was just absolutely amazing. The sun had set. It was getting closer to like 6:30, and I was heading to my guest house, the guest house I was staying, right on the Han River. And I was actually making a left turn and ended up getting T-boned by another motorcyclist. He actually was going really fast. It was dark. He didn't see me because I was had no lights on the side, and so he ended up hitting me right behind where my leg was, because it would have been really bad actually had he been off a little bit, because he would have hit my leg. There was a huge potential for disaster. Thank goodness it wasn't like that. I fell off my bike. I broke my arm over here and over here. Both bones broke completely. Luckily, my head, didn't hit the ground. There was no concussion. I sensed that there was something wrong with my arm when I sat up. And then when I lifted my arm, it was bent. It was kind of like this, and then it bent down. And so I kind of freaked out a little bit. I grabbed my arm and held it close to my arm, and then the bystanders, actually the manager over at the guest house I was staying, called the police and called the ambulance. And within minutes, the police got there, and then another few more minutes, the ambulance got there. And immediately the ambulance guy was like, okay, so you got a broken arm. Do you want some medicine? I'm like, hell yeah, I want some painkillers. Give me some painkillers, because I know the adrenaline's kicked in and I didn't really feel anything, but I knew it was going to start hurting when things started slowing down. And so he gave me a shot. The police took our statements, and I was taken to the hospital. It was a Friday night, and so I got to the hospital roughly at about 7 or something like that, 7:30. I had already contacted my relatives in Saigon, let them know that I was in an accident, and one of my aunts was flying down to help me with the translation. My Vietnamese was quite not as good at that time. It's not good now, but it's much better. So I was at the hospital, and they took x-rays. They told me that they wouldn't be able to get the operation done until the following week, probably about midweek. And since it was Da Nang and I didn't have any relatives here, or you know had a place to live, I figure it'd probably be better if I fly back to Ho Chi Minh City for the operation. And so we asked if it was possible to do that on a broken arm, and they were really reluctant to let me go. But I think finally, it made a lot more sense for me to head back. And so the doctor put me in a temporary cast. It was kind of open too. It wasn't like closed up or anything like that. It just kind of held things together. And then I got on a plane, the next morning, flew back on Saturday to Ho Chi Minh City, and then made an appointment and went to see the doctor, the surgeon, on Sunday. The doctor looked at my x-rays, went through the records, and made an appointment to have the operation done that following Tuesday. From Monday to Tuesday, I was on painkillers. And then on Tuesday morning, I went to the hospital early. I think it was like 9 o'clock for intake. And I got into the room at about 1 o'clock or so. And they were just prepping me for the operation because the operation was set to happen that evening. But I really didn't know what time things were gonna happen because I was a little bit more concerned about my arm at that time. I think at roughly about 7 or 8 o'clock that evening, they pushed me into the room to prep me for the operation itself. They put an IV in me, and then at about midnight, I think it was midnight, it took a while. I was like just laying there really, really like just wanting the operation done because yeah, having a broken arm for like the last 3 days wasn't the most fun thing to do. At about midnight, they wheeled me into the operating room, and then the anesthesiologist was sitting there and started to, put IV in me, put the medicine into the IV, and then also put a gas mask on me, and just basically said, "Okay, well, we're ready to go. I'm gonna put a mask on you, and I want you to count from 10 backwards." And then he put the mask on me. He said, "Good night." And then I started counting, and the next thing I do, I was waking up in the finishing room, the post-op room, which was kind of crazy because I've never had an operation, never been put down like that. And so waking up and having just this like pulsating pain in my arm, and it was just like crazy. It was just like so much pain. I saw that, it was straightened out. It wasn't like all fucked up anymore. I laid there for roughly about, I think it was like 4 hours, and it was probably the most miserable time, 4 hours, that I've ever experienced. They didn't give me any water, but they were observing me. There were other individuals in the room, and they were all in the same situation. A lot of them were like groaning, and there were a few people crying because they were in such pain, and there was no like medication. They weren't giving additional medication at that time. And I actually got to the point where I did break down. I was crying because I was in so much pain. I don't think I've ever cried from pain before, but yeah, that was just so crazy. Not long afterwards, they gave me a IV with some pain medication in there. They finally wheeled me out, and I ended up staying in the hospital for the next 2.5 weeks. And during that time, the doctor came in on a almost daily basis, if not every other day. I think in the beginning, he came in every day. The nurse were really good. The food there were, I think, typical of any food anywhere. This is the hospital food, and I got some jasmine rice. I also have some some vegetable, a little bit stir-fried, and then we got some soup and a tangerine. But my aunt and uncle brought some food, and other people brought me some snacks and things like that, which was great. The care in the hospital was actually quite good. Every morning at about 6 o'clock, the nurse would come in and do a cleaning on my arm. The nurse just helped me wrap up my arm and change the gauze and stuff like that. And yeah, it kind of looks pretty jacked up. They would give me a fresh IV if my IV was gone, and that actually had some pain medication in there, so I really liked those IVs during that time. She also gave me my medication, the medicine that I need to take for that meal prior to the meal. So I took medication 3 times a day, and every prior to that, the nurse came in and dispensed the medication as needed. So that happened daily. Soon afterwards, breakfast would come in, and you actually had got a chance to select the type of food you wanted. So you can have noodles, porridge, not rice for breakfast, but noodle or porridge or other things for breakfast, noodle soup. And then the nurse would come in again in the afternoon, give me my afternoon medication. And during that time, if the IV drip was running out, they'd come in and actually replace the IV drip. I was basically bedridden, I think, for the first couple days. And then afterwards, I was able to get up and go to the restroom myself. Also, I was able to go out for walks in the hallway and things like that. In the evening, at about 5 o'clock, the nurse came and started doing the medicine and all that stuff. And then food came, dinner. And dinner was also something you can select. Lunch and dinner, they had rice. Sometimes they had noodles, but it was mainly rice with a soup, a vegetable, a meat, whether it was pork or fish, and then they had a dessert, most likely fruits, but sometimes they had yogurt. In the morning, actually, they had yogurt. In the evening, it was mainly fruits. Towards the evening, the nurse would come in one last time for some additional medication if you need it. I think I was taking 4 times. I think I said 3 times earlier, but that was not true. It's 4 times a day. I had a lot of antibiotics pumped into me. That lasted for 2.5 months, 2.5 weeks, and I think I was supposed to stay a little bit longer, but they had to discharge me because the hospital was quite impacted. The hospital is actually quite good. It's the University Medical Center, and it's probably one of the better hospitals. They're always quite impacted, and so they try to move people out and get sick people into beds. And so I was gone about 2.5 weeks, and then I had to come back to the hospital every other day to get my bandage replaced, and the cost for that was quite reasonable. Most of that stuff I paid out of pocket, and I'll let you know at the end how much that will cost. That happened for another month or so, where I went every other day to get my bandage removed, replaced, and all that stuff. And then I got better, and I went back to the U.S. And when I got back to the U.S., I went to my primary care doctor to let them know that I had an accident, and also they wanted me to see a specialist, the orthopedic surgeon, to make sure that the operation was done properly. And I think when I was back in California, they were looking at it and they were thinking that they might need to take the hardware out, the titanium plates. Oh, I actually didn't tell you what was in here. There were 2 plates that were put in here. The inside had like 6 pins, and then the outside had 7 pins. So there were a total of 13 pins in my arm with 2 titanium plates. I think I had 1 incident of infection when I was in Vietnam and had to be on antibiotics for that. But when I got back to the US, I had another infection. And I think that was when my doctor was discussing whether or not to remove the hardware. But the infection was, they gave me antibiotic for it and the infection went away. And so that question of removing the hardware was off the table. But it would come up again further down. I went to the orthopedic surgeon. Everything went well. I had physical therapy. That also went well. I completed that. And my arm, I felt at that time when the physical therapy was done, I think there was probably about 90% movement as far as rotation is concerned. But at the same time, it just wasn't normal. It didn't feel normal. It felt like there was something in there. It was hindering the actual movement of my arm. So I didn't get like full range of movement. And then after my rehabilitation, everything seemed fine. And so I came back to Vietnam. In November of 2023, I came back to Vietnam. And I was here for roughly about a couple weeks. And then I ended up heading to Philippines for 2 months. Throughout my entire trip in Philippines, didn't have any issue with my arm. I was free diving, I was island hopping, I was scuba diving, I was hiking, doing everything, and everything was fine. And I got back to the US at the end of December. I got back to California. Everything was still fine. I did actually end up getting another infection on my arm and went to the doctor, and then I was giving antibiotics again. Everything looked fine, did x-rays, everything looked fine. The surgery seems to be healing and things of that sort. And I went to Central America for 3 months. Started in Panama City and worked my way all the way up to Belize. I skipped over Honduras. I think around Guatemala was when I noticed my arm was starting to swell up again. It wasn't pussy, but it did. But towards the end of my trip in Central America, there was a little bit of a wound here, and it wasn't healing. I got back to the U.S. and I went to see a doctor, and they said that everything looks fine. You just have a small infection there. We'll take care of it. We'll give you some antibiotics, and we'll take a look in a few more weeks and see how it progresses. But contact me if it gets worse. And so I just took the medicine and it got better. And then there was another infection, like not too long afterwards. By this time, my wound wasn't healing. There was a wound here and there was a wound here, and it was just like not healing. And it was just pus coming out of it. And at one point I was kind of like playing with it, and it was kind of hollow, and I felt hollow inside. But the doctor just kept giving me antibiotics. I kept going back for checkups. That was from May until August, because by August time, I'm like, well, I need to travel again. I was planning on going to Indonesia for like 2 months. And I had made plans and everything, and then I talked to my surgeon, the orthopedic surgeon there, and I'm like, I'm going on a trip, planning for 2 months, and he's like, well, yeah, I think everything looks fine with your arm, even though it's still has like an open wound. But he's like, just keep an eye on it, keep it clean and stuff, and when you get back, you would probably need to go get surgery on it and remove the hardware, because I think he thinks that might be the issue, but he's not quite 100% sure of that yet. So in August, I flew back to Vietnam, here in Vietnam, and I had actually spent like 3 days in Singapore. So I got back to Vietnam in like August 28th. The end of August, I got back to Vietnam. My relatives saw my arm, and they're like, you need to go see the doctor tomorrow. I'm bringing you to the doctor. My aunt said she was bringing me to the doctor the next day, and said, okay, yeah, I'm gonna go to the I'm gonna go see the doctor, get it checked out, and then in a few days I'm flying to Indonesia. Well, I went to the hospital the next day, and I didn't leave the hospital for another like couple weeks. Because when I got to the hospital and I saw the doctor and he saw the wound, he immediately ordered x-rays done on it. And so x-rays were done on it, and actually I think the last time I had x-rays done in the US was probably like about 2 months prior to that. And so he had new x-rays done, and then he looked at the x-rays, and then he's like, you have a bone infection. I'm like, oh shit. What? How? So yeah, so I had a bone infection, and they checked me into the hospital that day. I got to the hospital at like early in the morning, like 9 or something like that. And by like 3 o'clock, I was in the bed. And that night at about, I think it was like 8 o'clock or something like that, 8 or 9 o'clock, I was in the operating room. I'm at University Hospital in Ho Chi Minh City, and it's about 5:30 right now. I'm getting ready to shower and stuff like that so I can clean up, get ready for my operation on my arm. It's been pretty bad. I've had some issues with infection since my my accident last year, about a year and a half ago in Penang. But anyways, yeah, I need to get ready for that. So we just talked to the doctor, the surgeon, and it's actually quite bad. Depending on how this goes, if the bone is infected, then I've got to be in the hospital for like 6 weeks. And they're gonna be scraping out of the infection from my arm. And also, yeah, if the bone's infected, then that's gonna be the one that's gonna keep me here for about 6 weeks in the hospital. And apparently one of the pins, the head broke off. And so they might not even be able to remove it, which would require another procedure to basically break the bone and remove it and then reattach it. So yeah, not the best news today. And the next morning, I think they were done in the morning, and I think I woke up roughly at about 10 o'clock or something like that. So a few things had occurred that required them to do the operation in such a fast manner. Of course, number one is the bone infection. Number two, one of the pins in my arm, when they were looking at the x-ray, had actually broken. The titanium pin in one of my arms had broken into half. And so they were even like concerned about not being able to fully remove the plates because of that. But when they went in, they saw the pin and it was cleanly broken off. And so they removed everything. They removed the titanium plates. They removed the 13 pins in there. And I am fully without any hardware in there. And so immediately my arm is back to 100% mobility because of those plates. It was just it didn't feel right to have it in, but it was good that it was all gone. And I was in the hospital another 2 weeks, and then they let me out, and I was on antibiotics for the next about 2 months. And I think I had to switch antibiotics 3 or 4 times during that time because they had to kill off all the infection. And now I have a clean bill of health on that. And then this is kind of impressive, right? I'm kind of surprised I can turn my arm. And it's actually better than when I had my plate in because I wasn't able to fully turn. It kind of was up to this point. But now I'm able to kind of straighten it out, which is really nice. But that was only a second surgery. There was a third surgery. And that third surgery came only a week after my second surgery was done. And that occurred a week after I got back from the hospital. It's terrible. Terrible, terrible. And how that whole thing started up was I had what I thought was food poisoning or stomach flu or something like that because I was just feeling nauseated. I was feeling just not the best. Had a little bit of the chills and stuff. Seems like an infection, which was not good because I had just had my other infection. But I thought it was a food poisoning situation or stomach flu, and so I kind of had an idea of how my body would react. I drank a lot of water, rested, and so I just figured the next day I'll feel better. I'll start recovering a bit and stuff like that. The next morning I woke up and there wasn't anybody home. I was staying over my uncles and my aunt, and they had gone out shopping for food. And so I woke up at about 9 o'clock or so, and I felt pretty good. Felt really relaxed. That nauseating feeling wasn't there as much. My stomach wasn't turning. And so I went downstairs and my aunt had cooked some rice porridge. And so I took some rice porridge, I ate it, and right immediately after I ate it, I went and threw up. It wasn't working with me. And so I just went throw up, and my stomach just started coming back, and I started getting the chills again. And so I called my uncle and my aunt, and I said, I need to go to the hospital. When you guys get back, bring me to the hospital. And so they got back at about 10 o'clock, called the taxi, drove me to the hospital, went to the emergency room. It was quite a long wait, and I was in a bit of a pain because that pain from my stomach and the nauseating feeling started coming back, and I was getting really, really just like exhausted from all the pain that I was feeling. But they didn't give me anything. And finally, I think about an hour later, they took me in to get x-rays and get a CT scan. And they came back out and they immediately gave me some IV. And they told me that I had appendicitis, that my appendix was inflamed, and that I pretty much needed to get it removed. But they said that if you don't get it removed, we can treat you with antibiotics, but that most likely will come back again as being an issue. I went back into surgery for the third time that night and had my appendicitis removed. Then I was in the hospital for another couple of days and then finally went home. Those were the 3 operations that I had. You're probably wondering, like, you had 3 operations. Must have been so expensive, because in the US it would be hella expensive for the operation. But my first operation, everything included, the 2 weeks in the hospital, the medication, the follow-ups, all that stuff, came up to roughly about $2,500 for that first operation. So I had all that stuff covered because I had Safety Wing as my insurance provider. I ended up getting back $2,250 because they had a deductible of $250, so they took it off of the $25 and I got the rest back. The second operation cost roughly about $1,000 to remove the hardware from my arm. That included everything. It also included all my cleaning for the wound while I was recovering as well for both situations. And then the final operation, the appendicitis, that cost me, I think it was like 34 million. And that is roughly about, I think about $1,300. And so total operation over the last 3 years, roughly about $4,500 for all my operations. And probably had pretty good care too compared to how things worked in the US, because I'll be honest, like I felt like when I was back in the US and I was seeking out medical care for the infections, the doctor made me get x-rays and things like that, and it cost like, it was like $400-500 a pop. My copay, okay, this is not how much it would cost without my copay, but with my copay it was like $450. I had to do 3 x-rays for each of the rehab that I did for like the 6 months, and it was like once or twice a week. It started twice a week and then came down to once a week. That was $45 each time for my copay. And then for my copay from the doctor was also about, it was like $35. And I had gone to the doctors like roughly about like 10 times when I was there, the specialist. It costs way more just to do the rehab and to have the medical attention in the US than it did my operation to fix my arm and then to remove the hardware in Vietnam. And it honestly felt like they were very much into giving me medicine, but not necessarily fixing the problem that was causing the infection. Because every time I went there, it was like, oh yeah, we'll give you the medicine, take it, go home, and give us a call if you have any issues that come up. And it's not like taking the proactive stance of like making sure that there wasn't something else deeper that was causing my infections. It seemed like the solution to a lot of the issues that you go to doctors for in the United States is with pills. I'm actually really glad I got my operations done in Vietnam. The healthcare here, the doctors, the nurses were all really, really good. And I still go back, and because I had to go back and get some information, but they're also really nice post-op. You know, everybody was like, oh, how are you doing? How's your arm? And things like that. And it's like, wow, this is a huge hospital too. Anyways, That's my experience of how I had 3 operations in Vietnam. Hope you enjoy my misery. It wasn't actually that bad. Um, it was a neat experience. I would, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm actually really glad that I had that experience here, and had that problem here, because if I was in the United States, it would have really been expensive. And then I'm just like really doubtful that I would get the type of care that I got while I was here. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for updates. Thanks for getting lost with me, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.